Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Gilda Evans, bringing you the Autism Resource Podcast. This podcast and the ARP website are your one stop knowledge and resource base for autism and much more. I'm very pleased to have Emily Holl join me as my guest today. Emily is the director of the Sibling Support Project at Kindering, the first national program dedicated to supporting siblings of people with developmental and health concerns. As a social worker and a sibling herself, Emily has published her research and written in blogs, magazines, and books. She co-edited the Sibling Survival Guide, Indispensable Information for Adult Brothers and Sisters of People with Disabilities. Welcome, Emily, and thank you so much for joining me today to discuss the work you do.
Thanks so much for having me, Gilda. It's great to be here.
To start off, what is the Sibling Support Project and how did it get started?
Sure. I think you did a really lovely job in the introduction, telling people a little bit about the Sibling Support Project. As you mentioned, we're the first national program dedicated entirely to supporting siblings. And when we talk about siblings, my sort of shortcut is to say siblings of people with support needs, which can be developmental concerns, health concerns, mental health concerns. And we do our work in a few different ways. We, first of all, love to educate people through podcasts like this about the experiences of siblings and why it's so helpful to think about supporting siblings. We also like to educate people on how to support siblings. And that's really the crux of what we do. We are probably best known for creating these incredible opportunities for young siblings to connect called Sib Shops. Sib Shops are workshops for school age brothers and sisters where they can connect with one another, realize they're not the only kid in the world who has a brother or a sister with autism or Down syndrome or cerebral palsy or maybe some chronic health concerns, fill in the blank. So to realize they're not alone, to come to an event to just have fun and play and be a kid, which is so important, as we probably will get into later. Many siblings grow up quickly sometimes and can take on an enhanced sense of responsibility. I'll put it that way. And then finally, SIB shops are opportunities for information. So, information about disabilities, about chronic health conditions, and then also peer support. And I think that peer support element is the most important part of SIB shops. Hard to say because every component is so beneficial, but that peer support can be truly life changing for a young sibling. And when I talk about peer support, I talk about kids sharing their experiences and sharing their own thoughts and advice based on their lived experience of how other kids can handle maybe sometimes sticky situations that siblings can find themselves in. And I'm sure we'll talk about that. But information, peer support in a highly recreational setting, that is what SIB shops are all about since 1982. So we've been doing this for a long time.
Wow, that truly that sounds amazing, and that's really important, right? Knowing that you're not alone and you're not the only one that is walking that path and that is on that particular journey. And speaking of journeys, tell me a little bit about yours, your personal journey, and what brought you to the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, my personal journey began at birth when I came into the world as the sibling to a child with a disability. So my brother, Peter, is 2 years older than I am. He has developmental disabilities, and I obviously never knew life without him because I'm his younger sister. Peter was my first friend, also my first enemy. We used to fight over toys and other things that siblings fight about. I really looked up to Peter as my big brother. I really didn't know that anything was different about my brother until I saw how other children treated him. I saw that other kids would tease him and taunt him, and it was beyond the typical realm of kid chiding, right? Kids can be
Cruel.
funny,
Can
kids
be
can be
cruel.
also very cruel, yes. And so this kind of went beyond that. And I started to notice that they really treated him differently. And that sparked a lot of curiosity and questions. And that was really when I started to notice that there was something different about my brother. We didn't have a name for my brother's disability until much, much later in life, until he was in his 30s, actually. And I was actually the person who led the charge to get him a diagnosis so that we could get some support services for him. But until that point, we didn't have a handy little label that we could put on my brother. And in a way, that was really a gift, I think, because my brother, I thought it was so cool. He defied labels and he was still in many ways my big brother and my hero. But it was also challenging because when you don't have a name for something, when you can't identify something, label it, it's hard to understand how to approach it and how to respond to it. I hear parents now say all the time, well, it's not like we appreciated the diagnosis, but we were so glad and so relieved to have a diagnosis because now we knew what we were working with and now we knew what resources were available. And my brother and I, we were born in the 70s. We were kids of that era where special education was just coming into its own. And it was a really different time. It was a very different world. So I feel like I grew up a lot in the gray area, not having clear guideposts for who my brother was and how we could help him, which was challenging and also forced us to really just love him and approach him as a human being who needed things like we all needed things. And like just we tried to do our best with that. So yeah, so I come to this work as a sibling and I think that that really influenced my career trajectory. I worked for a large disability service provider in New York City after grad school. And it was there that I attended a SIB shop facilitator training back in 2006 or seven. This was a training that was offered by the Sibling Support Project, which is the organization that I now lead. And it was a training facilitated by Don Meyer, who is the person who created SIB shops and founded the Sibling Support Project. And he did this 2-day training to certify people who wanted to become SIB shop facilitators. And I remember sitting in that training just flabbergasted. I couldn't believe that not only were there other siblings out there, enough siblings that there were people out there researching SIBs. I had no idea. And there was this whole program dedicated to supporting other siblings, people just like me. And so it really blew my mind. And from that point forward, I wanted to understand everything I could about siblings, other siblings, not only to put my own experience into context, but to do whatever I could to be part of that support movement for brothers and sisters. And it really changed my life. From that point forward, I followed Don's work. I followed the work of the Sibling Support Project. I got to meet some of those sibling researchers that he talked about. And we found ourselves, a number of us, adult siblings who worked in the field one way or another at all of these conferences around 2007-ish. And we would always be the last people in the room. And we would find ourselves sitting in a conference room, an empty conference room, after the conference was over, talking about the need for sibling support and how to expand the work that Don was doing. And from that, another organization was born, and it's called the Sibling Leadership Network. It's a sister organization to my Sibling Support Project. And they really focus on promoting sibling research, policy and advocacy initiatives, and services and support. So it really changed my life at a time when the field of sibling support was changing and expanding, which was very exciting. And then finally, when Don retired in 2018, I put my name in the hat to carry on his work and was just so honored when I was selected to do that. And I carry on that work proudly today, Don is still very supportive of the Sibling Support Project. He is now a proud grandparent chasing grandchildren around. I think he's busier now than ever before in quote unquote retirement. I'm doing air quotes for people who are listening who can't see me. I do air quotes for retirement for Don because he's super busy, but always very supportive of the work that we continue to do to support brothers and sisters.
I want to elaborate a little bit more about those conversations you were talking about. And we have touched on this already just a bit, but tell me more about the reasons that it's important for us to be thinking and talking about siblings. And also, what are some of the misconceptions about siblings that are out there that you've heard?
Really great and important questions. I think, first of all, siblings are often an afterthought. When we think about the disability field, when we think about how we support people with chronic health conditions, maybe with life limiting illnesses, we recognize, of course, that the patient or the client is the first priority. And rightfully, this is why we have services and supports and medical interventions. And I think over the years, the field of family support has expanded based on a need and a recognition that family members are not just along for the ride. This is something that impacts every single person in the life of the person who's affected, who's directly affected. And so I'm really gratified that family support has expanded as much as it has over the years. And even when we look at family support services, I think it's very easy, if you do enough digging, to recognize that most family support services are really directed towards parents, right? Like when we talk about family centered support and family care, we're really talking about programs and services and supports for parents. And so you have walked this walk yourself, and you know very well that it's not a journey for the faint of heart, and it's not a journey that you want to be on by yourself. I think there should be more parent support programs. And I think it is very important to recognize that siblings are such important members of their families. And when we think about family centered support, family centered care, we have to recognize the family member who's going to have, if we think about it, the longest lasting relationship to the person with a disability, to the person with a condition. Brothers and sisters are often in the lives of the person with a disability longer than anyone. If you think about that, that is certainly longer than any pediatrician or doctor or clinician or social worker, any professional, and probably longer even than parent, right? This is a relationship that can easily exceed 7 decades, which is a long time. And that relationship is so important. I don't know when people will be listening to this, but it is May 10th of 2025. In this morning's New York Times, there's an article about the importance of the sibling relationship and its impact on our development as human beings. This is a fundamentally important relationship. Siblings are social models, 24/7 social models, super important, particularly for a child with disabilities. Siblings are first friends, as I talked about with my own experience with my brother. First enemies. We learn a lot about give and take and hopefully conflict resolution by
Right.
having these tussles with our siblings. We hope there's conflict resolution. And we are also companions, advocates, and eventually caregivers. And the importance and the impact of the sibling relationship cannot be underestimated. It is tremendously important. And I think some of the misconceptions about siblings of people with disabilities in particular are that, first of all, that our experience is either amazing and wonderful and shapes us in such positive ways, and it's 100% rainbows and unicorns. It's just a delight to have a sibling with a disability because it helps us become tolerant and patient. And like me, maybe siblings find their dream jobs in helping professions inspired by their brother or sister, which is very common, by the way, vocationally. We know that from the research. But that's a misconception that all siblings have this amazingly wonderful experience with their brothers and sisters, or that the sibling experience is terrible and it's all bad. And it's the reason that my life is so messed up is because of my brother or sister with disabilities. I think that there's a huge misconception that it's either one or the other. And the truth of the matter is that, like life for all of us, life for siblings is really a mixed bag, right? There are good things about it, and there are challenges, and there are a million things in between. So I think that sometimes people can be quick to put siblings in a category and dismiss them. But the truth is that life is complicated. The sibling experience can be complicated. And I have to say that in our work, we really emphasize not only supporting brothers and sisters, but also celebrating them and building upon the many strengths that they develop from the time that they're children, learning about adversity at a very young age by osmosis. So we want to celebrate that. And we also want to celebrate siblings as unique individuals. In addition to being a brother or sister, we want to celebrate them as their own people.
Life is definitely a mixed bag in general, but particularly in this type of situation that you're describing. I know for myself, I'm a mom of three. One of my children is neurodivergent, is autistic, and my other two are what would be considered neurotypical. And the dynamics between them, watching them as they grew, and also age difference can make quite an impact. So, talking about supporting these siblings, what are some strategies we can use as parents and professionals to lend that support and to make the overall experience a more positive one?
Great question. I think the key to sibling support for especially busy parents to remember is that a little goes a long way. We get a lot of phone calls and emails and questions from parents or concerns from parents who say that I feel like I'm not doing enough for my other child or children. I feel like I'm missing the boat. I'm worried that I'm ruining my other kids. And my first answer is always, if you're reaching out to us, you're definitely way farther ahead of things than you think you are. So don't worry about that. But I do think there are a few key things that parents can do to support siblings. First of all, open and clear communication is so important. And I think the principles of active listening go a long way with kids, but also adults. And when I talk about active listening, I really mean we want to be present when siblings are talking with us. And I think often when I talk about active listening and all the work we do in SIB shops, this is a key tool that we use. And the idea really is to be present when someone is talking to you, to acknowledge what they are saying. Maybe you're repeating what they're saying and rephrasing it so that they know that you've really heard them and you're asking questions, but you're also validating, especially important for siblings who might not always have the most, I don't want to say positive feelings, but they might not always have the most comfortable feelings. And it is additionally uncomfortable to talk about those uncomfortable feelings, particularly for siblings who feel like, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to add more stress to my parents, my caregivers. They already have so much on their plate, but it's hard to know what to do with those uncomfortable feelings. So if a parent can create an environment where it's okay to talk about those feelings and the sibling knows that those feelings are going to be validated, that goes such a long way. In most cases, parents or anyone, we're not going to change the situation. We might be dealing with challenging behaviors or limitations as to what we can do as a family because of the needs of the child with a disability. Those things may or may not change over time. But if a sibling can share their feelings about those things, their frustrations, their resentment, if they can openly express their feelings and be met with validation and understanding, if a parent can find it within themselves to say, I get why you're angry that we can't go to the beach today because your brother is having a meltdown or whatever the words are. I'm disappointed too. I really wanted to go to the beach too. That might not change the outcome of the situation. You're still not going to the beach, but that gives the sibling such a tremendous amount of validation and almost relief because it's hard to feel those uncomfortable feelings. It's even harder to express them. And hardest of all is to feel wrong for feeling these things. And so if a parent can validate, I think that's a very powerful way to respond. And we are talking about a lot of things during this podcast. And I think if people take away one thing from the conversation related to siblings, it's that siblings want to be heard and validated. And that right there, if you can manage to do that, it goes such a long way. If parents can find ways to set aside special time with their other children, with their typically developing children, that can be a really nice way to demonstrate that they're important, that they matter. And this can be something small. It can be 20 minutes a night after they put the child with the disability to bed and let maybe the siblings stay up an extra 20 minutes and do a puzzle together or watch part of a show or whatever it is, just to create that special time. I know for me growing up, my mom and I would go and pick up dinner every Friday. We would get takeout. It was like a special day of the week. And it was just 15 minutes there and 15 minutes back. But it was my favorite 30 minutes of the week because I had my mom all to myself in the car. We would listen to the radio. That's what we did back in the day. We actually just listened to the radio. We didn't have streaming and all that stuff. Or we would just talk about nothing, talk about things, talk about nothing, whatever. It was our time together. And that was just such a lovely thing. I've heard other siblings say that when they were growing up, their parents kept a little journal and they would write them little notes in the journal every now and then. There wasn't a regular schedule or deadlines or anything like that, but they could write little notes and say things like, "Hey, I'm just thinking of you. How was school today?" And it creates, air quotes again, time together without actually having time to physically be together. But it just plants the seed. I'm thinking about you. You're important. Even though we can't be together right now, we're still important to each other. And so I think if parents can get creative and carve out those little times, it goes really a long way. And then finally, I think the greatest gift that parents can give to their typically developing children is to make plans for the future and include the siblings in those conversations about future planning. Because I promise you that you will have people listening to this podcast, maybe their siblings, and they can really relate to what I'm saying, or their parents who are maybe not sure how much their kids are thinking about the future. I promise you that even young siblings, teenagers, even younger, they are thinking about the future. We put together this book called Views from Our Shoes, and it was a collection of essays by children as young as 6. And some of our youngest siblings said things like, "I wonder about when we grow up where my brother's going to live and who's going to take care of him." And so we can't underestimate the idea, the thought that siblings are probably thinking about this, about the future care of their brothers and sisters, about will they have enough resources to provide support. We actually have 3 Facebook groups for siblings. We have a group for adults called SibNet, about 7,000 people strong. It's an amazing supportive space. We have a group called Sib 20 for siblings in their 20s. And then we have a Sib teen group, which is less active now because the teens, they're not on Facebook. That's their parents' social media, maybe grandparents in some cases. And we have siblings in those groups on the younger end saying things like, when I went to college, I had to think about what major I could choose that would enable me to get a job close to home and pay me enough so that I could support my family, my partner, my kids, any kids I decide to have, but then also my sibling. And so it's a real consideration for brothers and sisters, not only logistically and financially, but also to think about their own capacity, their emotional capacity, their own bandwidth to care for potentially multiple generations, right? Potentially aging parents, their own children, and their brother or sister. It's a very common scenario and very common worry among siblings. So if a parent can start early and sit down with their typically developing child and the child with disabilities, future planning should be a family discussion, right? Because after all, we're talking about this person who should be part of the conversation about their own future. But giving siblings the opportunity to have a voice in those conversations and to have some choices along the way and to say, this is how I think I can be helpful. This is how I definitely do not want to be helpful or cannot be helpful. Those are really important and go a long way to help a sibling feel much more invested and much more willing to be involved because they have a voice in the process.
I have to say, Emily, the strategies that you mentioned and the points that you make are so important. And it's amazing how very often very overlooked and people just don't give due consideration to what you just mentioned in the way that they should. And it's also incredible to think of how, at what a young age, the siblings really do start to think about these things and wonder about these things and worry about these things, and how powerful and important feeling heard and validated and included is for everybody, but especially in this particular situation, so that the family feels they're working as a team. And
Absolutely. The reality is that most of us as brothers and sisters will become caregivers for our sibs at one point in time. That's just the reality because in most cases, we will outlive our parents and we are the next generation of caregivers. So the destination might be set in that sense, but how we come to that destination makes all the difference in terms of how we arrive. So if we come to this place of being a caregiver, having had no preparation, no discussion, maybe assumptions are made by parents, by ourselves, by others, that we will just do the thing without really having a conversation about what the thing is and what it looks like. And if we feel a sense of obligation beyond our capacity, clearly we're going to come to that situation in not the best way, in not the most available and helpful way. If, on the other hand, we come to that destination of caregiving, having had choices along the way about which pieces of it we feel confident we can take on, and also the ability to voice which pieces of it we don't feel ready or willing or able to take on. We step into that role with much more comfort and confidence and willingness because we feel like our needs have also been considered. And I think that's so important for parents to recognize. And it's so hard. Future planning is, there's so many emotional barriers to even starting, right? Who wants to talk about a time when I'm no longer here? That doesn't sound like fun at all. But I think for our families, especially, it's super important. And I'll tell you, when we did this as a family ourselves a number of years ago, I had always assumed that my brother would just live with me when we got older. It was just was something that we never talked about. We had not talked about the plan for the future at all until we were probably in our 30s and our mom got sick. She got pneumonia and wound up in the hospital. And she came out of the hospital. She was fine after that. But that was really a wake up call because at that time, Peter was living at home with our aging parents. And it was a great situation. It was great for the time of life that it was. And we hadn't thought about, or we hadn't, I shouldn't say we hadn't thought about, because I sure had thought about it a lot. I'm sure my parents had too, but we hadn't talked about what will happen when this situation no longer works because mom and dad are not able to or are not here. And so when our mom went into the hospital, it really was a wake up call. And it was actually my brother who called me and he said, I had no idea he was going to say this, by the way. He said, Emily, I think when mom and dad die, I can't stay in this house by myself. And it just took the wind out of my sails. And I thought, okay, we're having this conversation now. Okay. But thankfully, my brother was the one who started that conversation, and it sparked a whole series of discussions and then later planning so that we could have a plan. Through those discussions, we finally voiced what had been in our heads for all these years. And I said, you're just going to live with me, right? This is, as a family, we're having this conversation. He can move in with me. And if I get married, like, my husband will just have to be okay with that and we'll figure it out. And my brother actually said, oh, no offense, Emily, but I don't really want to live with you. And I was like, what? I was so surprised. But also, I had carried this around for so many years just by myself in my head. And it's not like I was trite about it. I accepted it, but I also knew that there would be sacrifices along with that. And so I accepted it, but maybe I wasn't super excited about it. I tolerated the idea. There were definitely good things about it, but there were definitely sacrifices. And so when he said that, it had just never occurred to me that wasn't everyone's idea. And then our parents said, we want both of you to be in a situation that you feel happy and that you feel like you're living your life the way you want to live it and that you're achieving your dreams. And so we had a lot of conversations. And through that conversation, I also realized I didn't want to recreate a situation for my brother that he was depending solely on me and a potential spouse. It was setting up, to my mind, the same exact scenario, fragile scenario that really all he had was our parents. And if something happened to them, who knows what's going to happen? And the same thing, if my brother's relying on me and my now husband, and something happens to us, that leaves him in a very vulnerable position. And so it's a long process, longer than we have time to talk about, but we did wind up getting him some long-term services and supports that enable him to live independently and that enable me to be a caregiver. Our parents have both passed at this point. I am his person, and I'm so grateful because it is the best of all worlds for both of us.
Yes, I very much agree with you. Planning is very important, but we are coming to the end of our time. So I do want to ask you one more quick question.
Sure.
Now, the services and resources that you offer, it sounds like they're both in person and online. I know you mentioned a Facebook group,
Yes.
but what about the other services and supports and resources that you offered in person and online, or how does that work?
Yes, I will encourage everyone to look for SIB shops in their community. Those are in-person workshops. I think it's so important to start supporting siblings when they're young. And when we do that, we know that there are better outcomes, not only for siblings, but for the entire family. And so I encourage people to look for a SIB shop in your area. You can come to our website, which is siblingsupport.org, and look for a SIB shop near your city and state. If there isn't one, you can contact us. We'll help you start one. We offer trainings all the time on how to become certified as a SIB shop facilitator. And that really, I think, is the most powerful way to start supporting siblings when they're young. We do have the online groups that I mentioned, SibNet, Sib20, and SibTeen. And then we partner with the Sibling Leadership Network to offer opportunities for adult siblings to get together and either socialize, right, through social events or through advocacy efforts or through educational initiatives. The Sibling Leadership Network has 27 state chapters and always growing. And so if there's an adult sibling listening to this who wants to get together with other adult siblings in their neck of the woods, they can certainly go to the Sibling Leadership Network page, which is just siblingleadership.org, and check out a state chapter.
Thank you, Emily, very much for your time and for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Gilda.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe to the podcast. You can find it on Apple iTunes, Amazon Music, Spotify, and other popular platforms. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. And if you would like more information on this topic or anything else we've covered on the Autism Resource Podcast, visit us online at autismresourceproject.org/podcast. If you have a topic you'd like us to cover in the future, contact us through the website or comment on any of our social media channels. And be sure to check out our growing website often, since we are continually adding useful information and resources. I want to thank our listeners for spending part of their day with us. This is the Autism Resource Podcast, and I'm Gilda Evans reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.